Hey guys, it's Kane here. Welcome to the channel. In this video we're gonna solve a couple of exercises, namely 3 of them, and we're gonna see how we can use all this knowledge that we covered so far in a more efficient way. So we're gonna see variable identification. We're gonna use arithmetic operations to address a couple of problems. What we're going to deal with in this exercise is going to be solving some questions from the lab sheet. Namely, we're going to start with question 11, and from there we're going to solve question 10 and question 5. So let's get started. As you can see from the lab sheet, we're going to solve question 11 first. In this question we're going to write a C++ program that prompts the user to enter 2 whole numbers, and having done so we're gonna divide the first number by the second number and display the result on the screen. So how it's gonna work is that we're gonna take 2 whole numbers which gonna be like integers, and then we're gonna basically store these into variables, and then we're gonna generate an outcome based on the solution. So it's going to be first number by the second number and display the result. Because the division is a process that will require a decimal point, we're going to have to deal with the, divide the number and get a define the number as a fractional number, as a decimal point. Because there is the possibility that even though your 2 numbers are integer, the outcome could be a decimal point number. So we need to pay attention to that. From here onwards, we're gonna go into Dev C++, where we're gonna type the code. In here, as you would see, we're gonna create a new source file and create the layout that we're going to type for every single program. This layout will be including and also the namespace, which is the standard namespace that includes cout and cin commands. Having done so, we're going to move into the next phase where we're going to define the main function, which is the console entry to the program. Don't forget to return 0 at the end, which will basically indicate that it is the endpoint of the console application, where it will return to 0 and it will end. We also type extra 2 statements which are optional, but it's a good practice, which is called cin_ignore and cin_get. These are used to freeze the screen. Now that we've finished that part, we will need to go back and define our variables. So because of the question, we're going to have 2 different inputs and 1 output. Those input numbers are number 1 and number 2, which are defined as integer. So we're going to ask them with using cout to the user to enter them. So we display a message as in enter first number and get the first number as number 1, and then we ask the second number and we get that as number 2. Now that we define these, we will have to deal with the operation. So we need to have the output, which is gonna be another variable, but this time around we're gonna define this as float, not integer, because there's the possibility that we can define we can get an outcome of a number as a decimal number, such as you can divide 2 integer numbers, for example 5 by 2, and get 2.5. so that 2.5 is a decimal number. Hence, because of the possibility, we define, whenever we see a division, we define it as a float. To differentiate the outputs from the inputs, we also initialize it to 0, so that this will differentiate as soon as you look at the program. You'll be able to differentiate what is input and what is output. Now that that part is done, we can divide number 1 and number 2. Number 1 divided by number 2, and to make sure that this division is in terms of float, we just type in the brackets float, so that the generated outcome will be a decimal number. Otherwise you might get an integer number, which is actually what could have been, you know, it's not wrong to write number 1 divided by number 2, but because of the question, because of the possibility, we're going to make sure that the fractions are also displayed. So now that we divided the operation, we're going to show the output. So answer will be displayed just as in the same style in the question. So it was like number 1, and there is the slash symbol, and we put the 2. This will ensure that the outcome is displayed exactly like in the question. You don't always have to follow 100% the same, but it's a nice idea to learn how you can use these tokens, because they can benefit you a lot. So that's in the question, it says number 1 divided by number 2 equals to the answer, and that's exactly what we typed. Now application, and we're gonna run it. Now when we run the application, the first thing that will be asked is the first number. So we type a number. We're gonna follow up the same given sample in the question, and as you can see, it shows exactly in the same way. So if you put them side by side, you'll be able to see that the outcome is exactly the same. So we can now try completely different numbers. Don't forget that the sample run that is given to you is just given for the purpose of guiding you. You don't have to enter exactly the same numbers, and as you can see in this example, if you enter 14 and 6, the outcome will be 2 point repeating 3, which is a decimal number. Now that we have done this exercise, we can move to the next one. In the exercise 10, we need to write a program that prompts 4 whole numbers as input and calculate and display the average of them. So again, a sample run is given to you, and like I said, this is just a guide that will help you. So we're going to create a new program, and we're going to copy paste the patterns that we used in the other question, so we don't have to type them again and again. So all those statements that we had include IOStream, namespace. We can simply copy paste them, so you don't have to type them again. We'll also do the same for the end. Now that this part is done, we can focus on the question. As you can see from the layout, we have 4 inputs and 1 output. So in a real question, in a realistic scenario, we shouldn't get these numbers one by one. We should actually use something called a loop to make sure that these are obtained in a more efficient way. But because right now you don't know anything about loops, we're gonna get them one by one. This is not, but because right now you don't know anything about loops, we're gonna get them one by one. This is not going to be 100% or dealing with this question, but because you lack the knowledge of the programming constructs of loops, how to use them at least in C++, we're going to get them in C++. We're going to get them one by one now and calculate the average. And just like in the other question, there is the possibility that you can get the average as a decimal point. In this specific question, actually the answer should be 12.5, not 12, but whenever these sheets are created, I think the average was accidentally typed integer instead of float, and we're gonna fix that mistake in this question as well. So you will see that the outcome is not actually 12, it's gonna be 12.5. Started with the program. Inputs and outputs, we're gonna define our inputs as number 1, number 3, number 4, referring them to n1, n2, n3, and n4. We have a sum so that we can calculate the average. You know, when you calculate the average, you add those numbers and divide them to the n number. you know, when you calculate the average, you add those numbers and divide them to the n number. So that's how we do it. We need, because those are not inputs, they are outputs. So having defined this, we're gonna ask each and every one of them one by one. So we're gonna ask the user to enter number 1, number 2, number 3, and number 4. So typing down now, enter first number, and we're gonna get the first number as n1. And now that we type that, we can simply copy paste it and just change the layout of the message. So instead of enter the first numbers, let's just we're gonna type it enter the second, enter the third, enter the fourth. We're gonna be enter the first number, the second, the third, and the fourth. And we will also change the variable names accordingly, of course. So it's gonna be number 1, number 2, number 3, and number 4. Now that we got the input, we're gonna calculate the sum, which is the sum of all these numbers, addition operation, and then we're gonna say average is equals to sum divided by n, which in this case is 4 in terms of float, or 4.0. Both of these approaches actually work. So you can simply say 4 and do the operation in terms of float, just as we did in the other question. Or an alternative approach is you can actually divide it by 4.0. As I mentioned to you in other videos, there isn't always one way of solving the problem. In programming, you have different approaches, so you can follow whichever approach you like the most. So as long as the outcome is the same, it doesn't matter which one you type. Now that we type the sum divided by the n number, in this case 4, we're gonna type an average message to display. And you will also see that the average display in the lab sheet was actually done in terms of integer, not in terms of float. So that is why it was kind of like rounding it to, where in this case when we put the average in here in terms of float, it's actually going to show you the decimal point. So let's just enter exactly the same numbers, which are 5, 10, 15, and 20. So 5, 10, 15, and 20. And when we get the output, you will see that the average is 12.5. No, average is 12.5, not 12. So this lab sheet actually needs to be fixed, because whenever the lab assistant solved this exercise, it put 12 there, defining the average as integer, but it actually should be float or double, because you are dealing with decimal points. Now if you convert the the average to an integer data type, or just not do the 4.0 and just name it as 4 and enter exactly the same numbers, you will see that the average will be displayed as 12. See, that's only because the division was not done properly to show the decimal points. It's nice to actually spot these mistakes, because we can talk and discuss in the videos that how you should approach to solve problems. It's okay to make mistakes, so we just need to fix this lab sheet at some point. But just know that whenever you need to do a division, you should do the division in terms of float or double, because that's how you show the decimal points. Now, as a last exercise, we're gonna solve another question. Just to show you one more time that you're gonna follow up the average layout that we define it as float and divide it by 4.0, and that should be the correct way to deal with this question. Now that we have done this, let's move to one more question, and I'm gonna solve question 5, where we need to write a complete C program to prompt the user to input radius and height of a cylinder in order to calculate the volume of that cylinder, and the volume formula is given below. And in this question we need to define the volume as float as well, and we are, as the sample output shows, we are going to ask the radius and the height as input and show the volume as the output. You will also realize the pi value is not given to you in this question. You never ask it, because we're going to define the pi value as a constant. In mathematical equations, pi is mostly accepted as 3.14 and not given to you explicitly. Those kind of values never change during the runtime, hence they are called constant values. They are defined just like variables, but their state is never changed, and we're also going to see how we do that in this program. So we're going to create a new source file, and just like with the other questions, we're gonna copy paste the patterns part of the program, such as the IO stream, namespace, main function, and so forth. And it's also we're gonna need to close it. So actually when you write this and then run the program automatically, you will realize that these lines create the console screen. So you can actually save it and immediately run it, and you will see that the empty control screen will be created. So once we have done this part, we can move into writing the program. Just as you press on the keys enter, you will also see that the message will be displayed. So let's just focus on the question now. We need to ask the radius and the height. We are going to define the height and the radius as input values. So we ask the radius first, and then the height of the cylinder later. Follow the formula as it's given in the question, and we need to make sure a decimal point. We need to focus to make the volume as a double value, because there is the possibility that as soon as you put a decimal point there, there is the possibility that you can get a decimal point answer. Hence why we're gonna make sure that the volume is also defined as float. So let's just define the inputs, height, radius, and in terms of float we're gonna define the volume. In terms of float we're gonna define the volume. The first thing, of course, that we have to define the pi value. So pi value is a constant, as I told you, so we put the const keyword. It's gonna be constant, float, and pi, and you will realize that the pi is written as in capital letters. So we kind of like, by doing that we can instantly differentiate a constant value from a regular variable, because usually constant values are typed all in caps. Having done so, we move and define the volume also as a float and initialize it to 0, because it's going to be the output we want to achieve. Now that we have defined our inputs and outputs, we can focus on the program. First thing we need to get is the radius and the height. So we're gonna type those first, radius and then the height. We're gonna type please enter the radius of the cylinder. then once we have done it, we're gonna get it. As the radius, and we're gonna do the same thing for the height. Please enter the height of the cylinder and get it from the user. Once we got these values, we will focus on the formula, which is actually given in the question, and we're going to follow that. If you look at the formula, volume is equals to pi r square and h. So that's a mathematical formula, so we need to convert it into the programming code. So volume will be pi multiplied by r square and then multiply by h. However, I made the mistake here that I was trying to follow up the formula, and instantly I typed r and h. But if you look at the variables at the top, you will see that I am typing x. So let's just go on and see how the program would respond. To this. So we're going to type volume of the cylinder equals to volume, and when we try to run this program now, you will see that I will get an error message on that specific line. You can see that it shows the error, and it says that it doesn't understand r or h because you haven't defined these values. Basically, in our program, r is radius and h is height. So this gives you the hint that you have to stick to the variable names that you identified. Otherwise, the program would not understand what you are trying to do. You must use exactly the same names as you define them. Once you fix this issue, you can run the program now, and it will display you the outcome correctly. So it's okay to see these error messages actually in the program, because if we don't make mistakes, we wouldn't actually we wouldn't actually know or learn anything new. So it's alright that we are making these mistakes. It's a nice idea to learn that you must stick to the variable name. So everything we define in C++ is case sensitive, and you must follow exactly the same naming conventions that you use in the program. Now that we fix these errors, we can run the program and see the output. So let's just run it. When we compile and run, it says please enter the radius of the cylinder, and we're gonna stick to the names that we have used and the sample output. So it was 5 and 10, so we're gonna enter the radius as 5. That is the same outcome. As you can see, the program works fine, and it displays the outcome correctly. By all means, these values that are given in the sample output are not the only values you can calculate. It could be completely different. But make sure that you know that sample guide is just there to guide you in the program, and it has no other purpose. Finishing this video now. Should you have any questions, you can post a comment or contact me. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video hopefully. Take good care and see you soon.